and text, how we can add different dimensions to our plans for the exterior and the interior and to different objects as well, and then how we can add text to describe the various elements that we have in our drawing so we can create a full set of working drawings. Once we're finished the formal part of our presentation, we're going to open up the chat panel where you can type in questions that you might have about dimensions in text, and I'll be able to answer those for you. So during the presentation, if any question arises, make sure you type it out. So when I get to that portion, I'll have a whole list of questions to answer for you. Following the entire presentation, as always, I'll send you out an email that has a booklet where you can read about all the different settings that we covered today in the class. And in there will be a link to our archive so you can look at past presentations as well. So let's get started on dimensions and text. We've finished our model. You can see I've got a simple floor plan drawn on our screen. And now the next step is to establish the dimensions for the interior and the exterior of this plan. Before I create any type of dimensions, I always like to review the dimension settings that I have so that I'll be able to change any of them if they don't suit the particular drawing that I'm working on. I'm going to go up to the Settings pull-down menu, and under the Settings pull-down menu, I'm going to select Dimension Settings. In the Dimension Settings dialog box, this is where we can distinguish how we would like to dimension our plan. The first tab that we see is the Exterior Auto Dimensions, and we can tell it just how many dimension lines that we want to create. So far with my dimensioning, I have an overall dimension tool, so right out 4 feet right here offset from the building is going to be our first line, and then 2 feet off that. I'll have my overall dimension going all the way to the full extent of the building. And then I'll have one below that, 2 feet below that, going to any projection, so where it sees corners. And then from there, I'll have my openings. So I'll have my openings line here that'll come and show all the various openings that are part of the plan as well. We also have another option for interior walls, and if you were to check that, if that is a requirement of your local building officials, then you need to dimension where there's also interior walls that are going to intersect that exterior wall as well, and that would add in the next line of dimensioning too. All of those are 2 feet apart. The very first one is going to be 4 feet off the building. If you want to make any changes to any of those, you just click in here and change any of those values, and it will allow you to update and change them. So just clicking in there will allow me to change those values. The one I didn't mention here was angled walls, and if we do look over on our plan here, if I move this dialog box out of the way, you can see we do have a set of angled walls. When the software does the dimensioning, it's going to pull dimensions off each corner that it sees when it goes to do its overall dimensions and to each projection. What the angled wall adds in is aligned dimensions that are going to go along our angled wall so that it'll also dimension those as well, so you get that exact aligned dimension too. So you're going to get dimensions to each corner, and you're also going to get them aligned if you select the angled dimensions as well. When you're dimensioning, it's very important that you dimension to the position that you want to dimension, and that's why on the right-hand side of this screen, we'll show you where to dimension to. Do you want to dimension to the surface? Would you rather dimension to the core, the exterior face of the stud or concrete block or whatever material you're using as your structural component of the wall? Do you want to go to the center line of that stud? Do you want to go to the interior face of the stud or to the interior face of the finished material? So lots of options of where you want to dimension to for your exterior dimensions. So this is the dimensions that are going to run around the exterior of our building. If I had selected interior walls here, I would then have to come down and describe where I want my interior dimensions to go as well. So the bottom part of that dialog box is for that interior wall portion. We also can show our extension lines differently. Do I want my extension lines to come right up to the walls and the corners themselves, or do I want to cut them all off from that furthest point? This on the right would be a more mechanical style. that we're used to here in North America, but around the world, people dimension differently, and I know that this is very popular and probably the most predominant in Australia. Openings. Depending on who your audience is going to be reading the set of plans, how do you want to dimension your openings? To the center line or to either side? And this is where you can tell it exactly how you'd like to dimension. When it's doing the dimensions to the openings, you can also add a opening height after the width, and that would be either separated by a slash or a dash or an X or a multi-line. So it would give the width of the window first, and then if we did multi-line underneath the line, it would then give the height. So if you wanted to add that extra information to your dimensions, you can do that as well. Also here in the Dimension Settings dialog box, there is another tab here called Interior Auto Dimensions. So when we run dimensions through the interior walls of the home, how would we like to dimension those? Do we want to go from the leading edge to the leading core, center line, trailing edge? You can have all of those various options. You just select the ones that you would rather use. When it's crossing through the walls, so if I had a series of walls, and I'll just draw a crude little drawing here of some interior walls, and when I come through and draw my interior dimension through those, and I've told it that I want it to go to the sides, each side of the stud, this option right here, ignore wall dimensions. If this is 10 feet, what ignore wall dimensions will do is it'll ignore the 3.5 inches that it's going to want to put in between the walls. So because it sees that it's cutting through, you can tell it just to ignore it. But if you'd rather see the thickness of the walls as part of those dimensions, you can do that as well. So lots of options there for how to dimension your set of plans. Here under the Current Style button at the very top of that dialog box, this allows us to select the style and how we want to dimension. So if I click on the standard style here, I'm going to right-click and look at the dimension settings that are part of this dimension style. The dimension style lays out how you want the dimension lines to look in regards to the arrow type, if you want to use ticks or solid dots or arrows themselves. And when you choose that arrow type, the offsets, the overlaps, the widths associated to all of those, and you can see here this extension offset. So when it sees a wall, it's going to bring itself up 1/8 of an inch, and that can be any dimension that you want to as well. You can play with these values. The dimension style also is used for any kind of leader line, and later on in our class today, we're going to be looking at putting in leaders with text and pointing at different objects, and this is where it defines the look of that leader that we're going to be using. How big is that arrow? Is it a dot instead? What's the gap between the leading gap there between the text and the end of the arrow? And you can change all of those positions, as well as the text. What size of text do you want to use? Where do you want that text to be positioned in relation to the dimension line? So we can say right now we have it above the dimension line, and over to the right we've got a nice preview of that. And the distance between the text and the dimension line is 1/16 of an inch. So if you prefer it to be lower or away from the dimension line, you can change that value. We can have it centered as it is in our preview, and if I switch it to distance from one end, I could put in a distance of how far I want it to be away, or the other end. So you can always play with the look of your dimensions and the text and where it's appearing. You may also want to override the system units. So perhaps when you were drawing your model, you drew it to the 1/16 of an inch, or maybe the 1/64 of an inch. You want to be very precise when you were drawing. But when you're doing your final dimensions on the final plan, I'm sure any of your framers wouldn't appreciate all of your dimensions down to the 1/64 of an inch. So that's where you can say, just go down to the 1/2 an inch. So you can override those system units and truncate off all of those dimensions so they're just to the 1/2 inch or whatever dimension that you'd rather them be to. Okay, so that's overriding the dimension style. You can also have different line styles for your dimension lines, your extension lines, your arrows and ticks. What color would you like them to be? What line type? What line weight would you like them to have? So again, fully customizable. So if you're not happy with the appearance of your dimensions, you can come in here and start playing around with all of these values. I always recommend doing just that, going in and playing with some values. Maybe tweak one value and see how the dimensions appear, and keep playing with these values so you can see exactly how each one of them works. I'm going to click Cancel out of here, selecting our standard style. I've set my interior and auto interior dimension styles, so I simply click OK. And now to put those dimensions onto my plan, I go up to the Tools pull-down menu. I choose Dimensions, and then I'm going to choose Auto Exterior Dimensions. As soon as I choose Auto Exterior Dimensions, it will follow the rules that I laid out in those dimension settings and automatically lay them out around my plan for me. To do interior dimensions, I go back up to the Tools pull-down menu. I select Dimensions, and this time I'm going to choose Auto Interior Dimensions. With this particular tool, you draw a line through your model, and I'll just zoom in a little bit so we can see that happening. I'm going to draw a line through the model. I'm going to start here at this point and come all the way through to the other side of the building. And when I left-click and I cross and I'm creating that line, every wall that it crosses over, it's going to dimension to, and it's going to follow those same dimension rules that I told it to. So you can see that dimension line appear. The interior dimension tool is an automatic tool, so it's automatically going to look for the next dimension line that you want. You don't have to cross through the entire building. So if I just wanted to cross through this washroom, I can just do that one room. So you can do the entire length of a building, going from one side all the way to the other, or just one room at a time as well if you want to just particular dimensions. Once you're finished, you right-click and tell it that you're finished. These are tools, these two tools, Auto Interior Dimensions and Auto Exterior Dimensions, are tools that I would definitely take advantage of before going on to your worksheets. When you go to your worksheets, you'll be able to add dimensions, you'll be able to add text there as well. But it's only here in your worksheet mode that you can take advantage of Auto Exterior Dimensions and Auto Interior Dimensions. When you get out to worksheets, that's when you'll be dealing with more manual dimensioning tools like linear dimensions that we'll cover while we're out there as well, so you can see how those dimensioning tools work. Another tool that I'd like to use here while I'm still in my model view is taking advantage of the room dimension tool. So going back up to the Tools pull-down menu, going to Dimensions, I'm going to go to Room Dimensions. This particular tool allows me to pick the corners of my building, of my room that I want to dimension. So I'm going to pick this upper left-hand corner, and then I'll show it the width of that room, pick to the other corner, left-click, and then it wants to know the length of the room, and I left-click down in this corner. From there, it pops up this dialog box, and it gives me the dimensions that it recorded. So if I want to truncate off any of those fractions, and I just wanted to make it 10'5" by 14'5", I can have a nice set of dimensions there, the text, and I can either display it width times length or length times width, and even choose a certain dimension style that I want to use, or a text style. And then I just click OK, and that room dimension automatically appears in that room. If I wanted to add a label for that particular room as well, I can go up to the Tools pull-down menu, choose Text, and Text. This text tool allows me to type in any text that I'd like to here in the text editor. But first, I would always change my text style. So I'm going to click on that text style button. Again, it brings me back to that same dialog box where I had chosen the text style for our room dimension. Here I can choose the style, and I'm going to use a label style, a little larger style of text. I can manually type in whatever text I would like to. So if I wanted to type in bedroom number 1, I could do so. But you'll also see over here on the right-hand side of the dialog box, we have all these predefined labels. These are strings of text that we typed out for you ahead of time, and all you have to do is double-click on them, and it automatically adds them as well. So it's a big time saver. So if you know there's strings of text that you seem to add on a regular basis, make sure that you add them to that predefined label list by clicking on this library button, and it allows you to right-click and add in a new label so that you can have a list of the labels that you would want to use and delete out the ones that you know you would never use. Okay. Once I have that text typed in, either by using the predefined labels or typing it in myself, I'm also going to check this multiple text insert. The text tool is a single command, so once I insert this text, the command would be over. And if I did want to put further text in, I'd have to go back up to Tools, Text, which takes some time. So this multiple text insert tool will allow me to automatically pop up this dialog box again. So I've got bedroom number 1, I click OK, I put it in that room, the dialog box pops back up again, and I'm just going to type in WC for water closet, uncheck the multiple text insert, letting it know that this is the last string of text that I'm going to be putting in. So I'm just putting in that text, and it's done. The command is over. Okay, so you can put in as many strings as you'd like to, or tell it when you're finished by just unchecking that multiple text insert. So two really handy text tools as well to add text to your plan. I'm going to zoom over here onto our garage. I want to show you another way to label a room that'll put in dimensions for that room, the area, at the same time it labels the room itself. For that tool, we're going to go up to the Tools pull-down menu. We're going to go to Analyze, Schedules, Room Region by Room. So we can define a region as a room and automatically associate materials to that room and room names and dimensions. So when I pick that particular tool, it wants me to choose a label name that I want to call this room that I'm going to be using. So I'm going to type in the word garage. When it puts in the name garage inside this room that I'm going to define, it can also display the area of the room, the perimeter of the room, and the volume based on this general height that I'm going to be putting in here. So if you need the volumes of certain rooms, maybe for energy calculations, this is a quick way of getting it in and printing it out on your plans as well. I'm going to uncheck those two and just do the area. So when I click OK, I merely pick inside the garage, and you can see that it automatically labeled the garage and put the area in there as well. So it's a quick way of also labeling a room with area as well. So some different tools for you to use to individually place text inside a room. We had tools, dimensions, room dimensions to put those width times height or height times width of a room size in a room. We also just used the general text tool to put the name in. And our last option there was under Schedules, Room Region by Room, which automatically will put in the room name and the area for us as well. So those are some great text tools that you can use to add text to your model. Now I'm going to switch to our sheet views, and I'm going to put in some elevations. So I'm going to go to this elevations page. And on my elevations page, I'm going to be defining a smart view, a view of my model that I want to insert onto the sheet. And when I do so, I want it to bring in some customized text as well. Okay, so here is our front elevation of the building that we're working on. For simplicity's sake, I'm just going to turn off the visibility of the elements on the terrain so that they turn off for us and they don't put extra data on our elevation. But with regards to extra elevation information, looking over on the left side of this dialog box, when I insert this elevation onto my drawing sheet, at the same time I insert the elevation, it can automatically associate some datum lines. These datum lines that I put in, I can say yes or no if I want them or I don't want them. I can define what I want to dimension to. So when it's putting in the datum lines, what it's going to be doing is putting in a series of dimensions. So if I wanted to go up to the top of my windows and doors, the top of my walls level, my floor level of the home itself, these are all lines it's going to put in So it automatically can put in text beside them saying that this is the wall height. It can have a datum line, and in there it can also put its elevational height at the same time. So over here in the list, this is where you're going to define which ones you want to dimension to. So I've told it I want it to put a datum line in at the floor level, and I also want another one at the head height. I've changed those two to yes. The options that are still at no, it's not going to create those datum lines for me, those elevation lines. So you can check them all off if you wanted to. How it puts in those lines, the line weight associated to them, the size of the text when it puts all in that text, that's handled here in this settings button. So I'm going to click on that settings button right now, and it'll take me to a dialog box where I can define how I want those datum lines, elevation lines to appear. So what it's telling me, it's going to put datum marks on both sides of my building, but I could say I just want them on the left or I just want them on the right. I don't need them on both sides. I'll keep them on both so we can see them on both sides. When it puts in that datum mark, that line, it's going to put in a block as well, and that block can be one of your choice. In the version 11 template, we preloaded a datum block for you to use, but you can certainly insert your own block and use it, so it's not the same one that we're using. Leader line, so once it's put a full datum line through the whole building, it'll also put in additional lines out the side of the building. And we're telling it here that we want them to be 6 feet long. And we want the color here to be by layer, which you can see is red. We want the line type to be by layer, which we can see is a continuous line. And we can see the line weight as well. So we get a really good look of what this is going to look like when it starts to put these lines on our elevation. The datum line itself that runs through our building, we're telling it to extend past the building by 6 inches. The color of it's going to be red. I've changed the line type here to be dashed, but I could say by layer, and you can see that that's a continuous line. But you can play with this, and I told it I wanted that to be a dashed line. And then again, you can see the line weight. All of this text, this way of adding text to our elevation, is all going to happen automatically when we insert this elevation. This is the text it's going to put in. It's going to put the descriptive text on the right-hand side of the elevation, and it's going to be above the datum line. So that's where it's going to say floor level or head height, ground floor. The elevation, the actual dimension that it's going to put of how far off of grade this particular line is going to be above the datum line, but it's going to be the left side of our elevation. And the style that we've associated for that text, we've created a new style of text called datum, or you can choose your standard style of text as well. And we've told it to center it on that line. So I'm just going to hit OK here to accept those settings. And once I review that elevation then, and realize I have everything that I want to insert, I review it. If I want to add a hatch, I can in my elevations. We're not going to cover all of that today. We really want to look at dimensions and text. But then it'll create a copy of my elevation. As soon as I hit that insert button, it'll attach to my cursor, and then I'm going to insert that onto my drawing sheet. So it'll attach it. I simply bring it over, and I left-click to insert it onto my drawing sheet. I realize some of you are on a screen delay right now, so I'm going to hold at that point so you can see the elevations coming in and watch the datum lines automatically appear. So I'm just going to hold my screen while we're waiting for everybody else's screens to come up to speed. And once I can see the slowest screen, I'll catch up as well. Looks like everybody's here. So I left-click to insert that elevation. And when I left-click to insert that elevation, you can see this datum line text automatically appearing. On the right-hand side of the elevation, it gave all of our descriptive text like we told it to. And on the left-hand side, that's where it gave all of the dimensions for each one of those as well. So that's a very handy way, a quick way of adding in dimensions and text at the same time. That datum line tool works for elevations, and it also works for sections as well. Another way of adding text to your buildings is I'm going to go here to the Draw tool, And I'm going to go to the very last option that we have here in worksheets called the roof symbol tool. So these are all of our detail tools, and I'm going to choose roof symbol. The roof symbol tool allows me to define the slope of the roof that I have created. There's also a pick portion here, so I can come out and say pick, and it'll tell me that that's a 3 and 12 slope. It automatically can pick that up and detect it for us. The text style I want to use, I'll tell it to use our standard style of text. The length that I want that to go, so if I want this to be bigger or larger in the first line, I can make that larger. And then also the alignment of where I want that to go. So I'll click to the right there, and then I'll click OK. That will attach itself to my cursor. The text is to the right of the datum line, or the elevation, the roof tool, and it automatically inserts it. So it's a quick way, again, of dimensioning your roof slope so you can automatically see it. While I'm on my elevation, I want to show you another text tool that is available to quickly dimension and add text to your elevations. I'm going to go up to the Tools pull-down menu. Under the Tools pull-down menu, I'm going to choose a leader, and I'm going to say Description with Leader. Okay, so this is going to put in an arrow at the same time as a description. I want to describe the wall itself, so I left-click on the wall. Once I left-click on the wall, now it wants me to draw the arrow. So I'm going to left-click on the wall itself inside of it. I'm going to draw a line up, and then I'm going to draw a line across, and it automatically labels it as 2x6 stucco. It knows what I pointed at was the 2x stucco wall that I've chosen. It looks at the description of what you put in. Let me profile that to you one more time. I'll go back up to Tools, Leaders, Description with Leader. This time I'm going to pick on this column that I've drawn, left-click. I left-click to say I want it to point it here at that column. I draw where I want that arrow to stop, and left-click where I want it to go, and it automatically puts in that text as well. So it realizes what you're pointing at, and it allows you to automatically put the label there. So it's a really quick way of getting your notes done for you as well. And that same tool, the descriptive tool, can be used without a leader. So if you don't want to use a leader line, you just want the description, I can pick on an element and then just left-click and put in the text as well. So it'll say, hey, that's 2x6 stucco wall you've selected, and it can put the text in. So quick ways of adding that extra text in there as well. Here in the worksheets, you have your descriptive text. You also have the text tool. I'm going to zoom out a little bit here on my model, go back up to Tools and Text, and just use that text tool again. Here, I'm going to tell it that I want to label this as the front elevation. So I can put that text in. I'm going to underline it. And then underneath that, I'm going to change my text style to be the dimension style of text, so it's smaller. And then I'm going to type in, and not underline it, scale, if I could type, 1/4 inch equals 1 foot. Okay, so we can have different types of text in at the same time. I click OK, and you'll notice here in Worksheet that your cursor isn't an arrow like it is in Model Space, it's crosshairs. And that crosshairs allows you to line up when you're inserting something. So I want this front elevation text to be exactly in line with the exterior wall of the building. So I put that in, and there it is. And it's another way of adding in the text. Zooming in here, if there is a particular dimension that you wanted to show, I'm just going to zoom in here. We can add manual dimensions as well. Tools, Dimensions, Linear Dimension. The Linear Dimension tool allows you to pick 2 points. I'm going to left-click here at the base of the wall, left-click here at the top of this half wall here, and then I can show it where I want that dimension to occur by left-clicking again, and it will place that dimension there. So you pick 2 points, it'll define the dimension, the distance between them, and then you left-click again to show you where you want that dimension to occur. So there are many different dimension tools as well. So if I pick on this particular dimension, I'm going to go back up to the dimensioning options, and I'm going to tell it that I want it to split that dimension apart. I want it to split it right here at the base of where it's putting in that extra piece of trim at the top of this wall to show the thickness of that entire trim. So you can split dimensions apart. You can also take the dimensions itself. I'm going to go back up to dimensions, and I can join them back together. So if I realize, oh, maybe that's not the best idea, I can pick on the 2 dimensions and join them back together as well. So lots of flexibility of how you're putting in those dimensions and allowing you to modify them once they're in as well by putting in the split or the join back together as well. What I'd like to do is spend the last portion of our class on specific questions that you might have about dimensions in text. So while I'm going over everything and kind of reviewing everything that I did cover today, please type in any questions that you might have about dimensions in text, and then I'll be able to go directly to your questions after I've given the review of everything that I covered. So back out in model space. When you're in model space, before you go and put your views of your model onto your worksheets, that's when I would definitely take advantage here in model space of our auto exterior dimensions and auto interior dimensions. If you're going to put in room dimensions, width times length or length times width, then use our room dimensions tool, which is available only here in worksheets as well. We do have full text tools here, so you can add in any text or text with a leader. You'll notice here as well that you can use the tool to label the room with the dimension, the area or the perimeter or the volume, and the text as well, using our room region by room tool. Again, here in our model view only. Once we insert the view of our model onto our worksheets, like we did with this elevation, that's where we can take advantage of things like the datum line. So as we're inserting an elevation or a section, making sure that those datum lines are automatically inserted as well. Taking advantage of the leaders tool and doing a description with a leader, or just the text tool with the description, or just putting in some simple text as well. Remember also to take advantage of the detail tool called the roof symbol tool, which will put in the triangle and the text for the roof symbol automatically when you define that roof slope. And if you're not sure of a roof slope in a particular area, just like I did today, you can pick those 2 points and it'll automatically define it for you as well. So now let's look at your questions that you might have about dimensions in text, and I'll be able to answer those for you live during this last portion of our webinar time together. First question. Looking at the entire floor plan, the dimension lines can be quite overwhelming. Is it possible to dimension those dimension lines so they stand out less? When I'm looking at the model here, lots of dimensions, like you said, maybe you don't want them to stand out so much. That's when you can take advantage of the line work that's involved in these dimensions. Remember, we went up to settings and dimension settings. Here in dimension settings, if I went to the current style button, that allows me to define how I want these dimensions to appear. And if I'm finding that the dimensions are too overwhelming, they have the same maybe line weight as all my walls, it's confusing, I can edit that dimension style. And coming in here, that's when I can change those line styles, making them a very light line weight with the extension lines and the dimension lines, so they're not so overwhelming. But all of the dimensions that it's putting in are important, so you want them to all be there. You want to dimension to all the edges of the building and all the different openings, but maybe just turn down how how much they overwhelm the view by turning down their line style in the dimension settings. Can these lines be dimmed selectively? If you select a line, so I'm just going to go back out to our worksheets as an example. When you're in the model view, they're all dimensioned the same and they're following all of the same rules. But if I come to this sheet and I define our smart view here and just come in and set that in, and I just want to turn off the terrain so it doesn't overwhelm our view for us here. So we've got a simplified view. I'm going to insert that onto our drawing sheet. And if I select the entire sheet, it selects everything for us. But I can come through here and edit the definition of these. And I can take one dimension as an example. And I can change its layer. And if that layer has a different color or line weight, that's where I can change that. But it's as far as maybe eliminating one dimension, I would do that here out in the model view so that it doesn't translate to my working drawing sheet. So I can certainly come in and just pick on one particular dimension, perhaps this one right here, and say I just need to delete that one out. I don't particularly need to go all the way to that corner. So you can delete out and turn different dimensions to different layers that might even have a different line weight as well. Okay. Can applied dimensions be rotated to various angles? I might want you to define that question a little bit more. I'm not sure why you'd want to rotate a dimension because it's picking to those two particular points. But if you're looking to put in a dimension that's aligned to an angle, then you would use the Tools Dimensions Aligned Dimension tool. This Aligned Dimension tool allows you to pick 2 points. I don't have really anything other than these. Maybe I'll go to the inside of this garage. I'll say this corner and turn my angle snap on here to this corner, and it will align itself to that. So if you're looking to align a dimension to a certain angle, I would use the dimension tool called Align Dimension. I wouldn't rotate them afterwards, but chime in again of why you would want to rotate a dimension, because they are going to 2 particular points, so I'm interested in why you would want to rotate those dimensions. That is all of our questions that are up there. So if anyone else has any questions, maybe questions about the particular things I just showed as well, make sure you type those up so that you could take advantage of this time and understand the various dimensioning and text tools that are available in Envisioneer and Pro Architect version 11, so that you can add these various dimensions and take advantage of these tools for your own sets of drawings as well. So I'm just going to review these questions to make sure I haven't forgotten any or skipped over any. Here's another one. My question is not rotating the dimension lines, just the number to facilitate easier reading. I see. So when we're picking on a dimension, this one in particular here, perhaps this one out here, when I right-click, you can see that I can move the dimension line. So if I need to move it up or down, so it's maybe easier. Or I can override the text. When I get out onto the worksheets themselves, so I'll go to our elevations page where maybe I put in that one dimension. When I select that dimension there, you can see that it's independent. So if I need to move that text, it becomes independent once it's out here on the worksheets. But when it's on the model view, that's when they're grouped together so that they stay together and you can move them efficiently. But once it comes here to the worksheets, that's where you can pick them up and move the text independently as well. Okay, that does seem to be our last question here. I'm going to hold the line here just in case another question does pop up. But while we're waiting for another question, I do want to take you out to our website, www.cadsoft.com. And out here on our website, I went to the Client Center. I want to make sure everybody knows about all the various tools that are here to help you learn while you draw. There's various tutorials that you can look at. These are various printed documents that you can read or videos that you can watch on various topics. So if there's a particular area of the software you want to learn more about, go to this page and you'll be able to look at all the various options here. Okay, the webinars where you signed up for today's class, there's all classes happening every Tuesday at 2 o'clock, and you just have to register for those classes. So next Tuesday, August already, August the 4th, we'll be looking at modification tools and worksheets. What tools are available in worksheets if we need to modify something like our text or various options there. So we'll be covering that next week. You just have to register on this page. Registration is open for anyone that is on the current release of our software. So if you are running Envisioneer or ProArchitect version 11, you'll be able to attend that webinar next week. And then you can also, at the bottom of this page, go to our webinar archive, and it needs a username and password. And that is changing at the end of the month so that our version 11 clients will be able to view them next month. And those of you that might not be on the current version at that time, the access will turn off for that particular page. All right, let me just look at our questions to make sure they're all answered. And that seems to be all of the questions answered today. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today for our webinar. Make sure that you do register each week for the class. It's a great way to learn specific tools in our software, a little bit of learning each week. And then you can take the tools that you've learned in our class and put them towards your everyday work in the software. So I hope you learned something today about dimensions and text and adding in various text tools to your model, and you can use those in your work. And I look forward to seeing you in next week's class as well. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week. Bye-bye.